before we take a break, I just want to send everyone a link to get a file running before we take our break, because unfortunately this thing takes forever to run. So and if we don't get it running in your setup, that's totally fine, because there are lots of easier ways to do this, but I just want to show you what the Colab notebook for this looks like. So we'll cover more of what this is when we come back from break. But let me just quickly share my screen and I'll walk you through sort of what we want to run before we take a break. So this is, as I mentioned, we'll talk a little bit more about what GPT is when we get back. But this is a model called GPT-J. And what I would like everyone to do is, so first off, make sure that when you go to runtime, go to change runtime type. Make sure this is set to TPU. It probably is by default, but just make sure it's set to TPU. I'll talk about what that is when we come back, but for the moment, just hit cancel on there, and then let's run the first cell. It says this usually takes 5 minutes. I found if you're on a slower machine, it can take a lot longer. So just run the first, let's see, one. Come on. So run at least the first cell. Once my screen stops freaking out on me, it will run the next cell as well. So I would say run the first, let's see, there's probably 4 or 5 cells. So run the first 4 or 5 cells, and then we'll take a break. So when we come back at 9 o'clock, and hopefully by the time we come back, our file will be set up and running. So run this cell. Man, come on. So run the very first cell, and then the setup model cell, and then the next 2 cells. So run the first 4 cells. Run down to run model. So basically every cell before that. So run those in order, and then we'll come back in 9 minutes, and hopefully this will be all set up for us to talk about and work with. Sound good? All right, see everyone in 8 minutes now. Okay, so I don't know what GPU I'm on, but mine is still in the first cell. So we'll see if we can actually get this running. It's actually fine if we don't. I would say I wanted to show how to use this in Colab, because I just think, we're doing a lot in Colab in this class. But I actually think it's to install all this stuff feels like overkill, considering this tool is available in a couple other places. So we'll take a look at some other options while this runs in the background. So first off, just a little discussion about what GPT is. I assume many of us have probably at least played with GPT-2 or GPT-3. GPT-2 was probably put out a couple years ago from a company called OpenAI. And the idea is that it's trained on a really large data set, and you can write text, and then it will sort of respond with its own, not to say chatbot style, but just sort of like picks up what you're trying to infer and is able to continue sentences or continue language in a really fascinating way. And I guess maybe last year or the year before, they put out GPT-3, which is trained on an even larger data set. And the challenge, or the thing that they did that is kind of annoying, is that they made it private source. So like you have to sign up to get access to it. So let me just see if there's a place to sign up for it. So let me just type this in here real quick. GPT-3. So you can sign up to get access to the GPT-3 API. I don't know if they've made it easier to get access to it. I know for a very long time it was like super exclusive to be let into testing or using their tools. And around that time, yeah, you can go ahead and click, if you're interested on this, you can go ahead and click on join the waitlist. You might have to tell them why you're interested in doing it. Probably maybe give them some information, what project you want to do, that sort of thing. So around that time, a bunch of other machine learning people sort of got tired of waiting around, and they actually just built their own version. So what they did is they took all of the concepts that were written about for the GPT-3 paper, and then went out and scoured the internet for their own data set, and basically built their own data set, and then train their own model on what they assumed was how the GPT-3 model was built. And what they came up with is a thing called GPT-J. Um, so this notebook essentially will give you access to that model. So it is not GPT-3. It is sort of a GPT-3 clone. And let's see, it looks like I got an error message. What was my error message? All right. Yeah, fuck this notebook. We're not we're not going to use this notebook. I fixed it. I fixed some of these errors like a week ago or like this weekend so that we could do this and it already broke again. This is fine, not the end of the world. The nice thing is that the people who made this also made a web tool that is called or is just like here's the website for it. So we'll actually use this for the time being, which is honestly just as helpful and it's faster. So if you want to go ahead over to this link, I will maybe see this weekend if I can fix whatever the error message is in this notebook. It seems super brittle, but this web page works really well. I used it just earlier today. So we'll talk a little bit about how this works and what tools we can use, and then we'll play with some of the examples. So again, this is a really massive, massive data set. And what is really interesting about this tool is people have learned that the key to it is what we call prompt engineering. So if you've ever done stuff with Clip or like the Clip vegan tools, you might know that how you write stuff and the order or the like words you use have a really strong outcome into how you actually generate language from this. So, your first thought might just be like, let me just come over here and just let me type in, um, let me see. I think I pulled up some text. Let me just grab that text real quick. Um, so like I just grabbed, this is some Walt Whitman. So I literally just grabbed this and if I put it in here, we'll talk about what these top P and temperature are in just a minute. But you might just come in here and think, okay, let me just drop in some text and let me hit run the model and let's see what I get. Come on. And so I definitely encourage you to take the sentence you grabbed or like whatever and drop it in here and run the model and see what happens. So when you run this, it should take, a little bit of time just to sort of generate some concepts. I don't know what's running in the back end. It might just be, um, that sort of thing. So look at this. So the GPT response is that, by the way, I found a bunch of references to this poem while I was researching the Heian period. I think that's how you pronounce it. So like, you might think, well, like, why didn't it just continue my poem, right? Like, shouldn't it just continue to add poetry? And unfortunately, the way this works is always a little confusing. It doesn't always give you exactly what you want. So there is a really great article on this page, which I'll give you the link to. This is from a sort of a machine learning researcher. I don't know his real name. He goes synonymously by Gwern. And this is an article, he writes these very long, um, very full articles on just sort of like his experience. I will say he is very pro machine learning, so you might glaze your eyes over at some of the like overly optimistic views about these tools. But he also went through and said like, here are a bunch of examples of how people did text prompts and how they were able to sort of get various techniques out of the piece. So I definitely recommend if you're interested in playing with this more that you read through this entire article. What I will highlight is that one of the fun or interesting things about this tool is that it can infer a lot from what you're trying to do. So what we might do is instead of just dropping in the poetry and sort of saying like, okay, here's my poem. Can you add to it? What we can actually do is we can write some prompts which will give us like sort of like give the model some idea of what we're trying to achieve. So if we do style, so we can just type style and then let's say Walt Whitman poem, and then we can sort of say, let's say first 4 lines, and then we'll feed it this. And then what we can do is we can then say next 12 lines. Now, this is not like a syntax that like the model like was given and sort of said you have to build off the structure. It just sort of we found out like through trial and error that this is the GPT understands what this means. It means like, okay, you're saying here are the first four lines of a poem in the style of Walt Whitman, and then you're basically asking me for the next 12 lines, which is kind of fascinating that it knows what to do with just this information. But let's see what happens. I tried this earlier and it did work with one line. So let's see if we get something that works with this with the next 12 lines. I wonder if because we're all using this at once, if it's just bottlenecking. Like there's one GPU running this and it's sending us all answers. So it might be a little slow. Who knows? Okay. Um, so look at this. So it did not generate what I think are 12 lines, but it generated 2 lines and then what it is. An epic, some might say, for those who don't know, it's a poem about young aspiring poet who at the age of 37 decides to end his life. Well, okay, that gets kind of dark. Um, so maybe this is actually pulling from like an actual description of what this piece is. Maybe it's inferring something else. This is the fun slash challenge of GPT, is just trying to figure out how to structure this in a way that returns results that you find interesting. So maybe if we just remove this and let's just try first line. And let's just say first line. And we'll hit run model. Okay, so it kind of seems like what's happened here is this mod it assumes we're trying to maybe I don't know write as maybe like someone's high school like test about like what's going on here, right? So then it says why this poem is significant to you. But what we do get here actually is my soul, like, we get a couple lines, and I don't know enough about this particular Walt Whitman poem to know if these are actually the next lines or if this is just sort of like an amalgam of things. Another thing that could be really interesting is you could say, what if we did a style of Walt Whitman, and let's see if it knows any Stan Brakhage. If you've ever read any of Stan Brakhage's work, he writes in a very strange way. So let's see if this model knows Brakhage. Okay, so here again, we're getting some interesting results. What's really funny is I don't know what I must have used something else for my previous structure. Maybe I structured the thing slightly differently. Um, but I was able to actually generate a bunch of, I was actually able to get 12 lines of text previously. So, who knows if maybe the machine's just having a bad day. The other thing I should mention here, which I think is helpful to know, is what exactly are the top P as well as that's not the right thing. Go. So there is a thing called top P as well as temperature. And in the notes of the Colab notebook, if you scroll down here, oh, great. So Steve has access to GPT-3. So everyone hit up Steve to help us out if we want to try the GPT model. I should say that I have heard that the GPT-3 model is still better than the GPT-J model, but GPT-J is a little bit closer to how GPT-3 works than GPT-2. So take that however you want. So in the notes here are what temperature stands for and what top P stands for. So temperature is sampling temperature. Higher values mean the model is more likely to take more risks. You can try 0.9 for more creative applications, and then or a lower value for something like a more well-defined answer. So I think if we want to generate poems, Yeah, so sorry, I'll come back to that, Ben. But so if you want to generate something more poetic, some more creative, you can use a higher temperature value. Similarly, the top P also sort of does a similar thing. The higher the value is here, the more likely you are to get really strange pieces above that. So again, if you want something that's a little bit more realistic, then you probably want to lower your value. But an important thing to note is that you don't want to set it to 0. Similar to how truncation works in StyleGAN, for those of you who have taken any of my StyleGAN stuff, if you set it to 0, you will essentially get like what we call deterministic, which means if you feed it a word, it's going to basically always respond with the exact same word. So 0 is like too low. 1.0 is probably too high and a little crazy. So you might want to play with something a little bit between those values. The other thing they also recommend is like don't play with both at the same time. So again, sort of isolate your variables. So play with temperature until you get a good range, and then maybe play with top P until you get a good range. If you play with both, you might just like end up like sort of getting a little bit too chaotic of difference and change. So Jonas also said that if he added, so you added poem. Work for me is to
Yeah,
generate a
so
poem. Yeah.
and before the lines, like the conditioning lines, I just added poem colon instead of like,
Okay.
and that like I don't have the first, like I didn't write first line, and so kind of instead of first line I just said poem colon, and
Okay.
then it didn't like have this like analysis underneath it and just like more
Okay.
lines of poem. Yeah.
Let's try it. Let's see what happens. Interesting. So I got almost a Wikipedia entry back. So maybe you don't even, again, if depending on what you're trying to achieve, maybe you don't even want this. You just want poem, and maybe you'll get something different back. This again is probably, I think one of the challenges with using these sort of tools is that um, if you're used to something like StyleGAN and you've taken my class before, you know that a lot of the creativity comes in building the data sets. With these sort of text tokens in either like Clip or in this, like the creativity comes in how your prompt is written and structuring the prompt in a way that actually like sort of gives you what you need in return. And I think as Ben mentioned, one of the other things you could do, so actually let's do this. So we go back to this version. If we run this, there is also send result as a prompt. So we could also take this result and feed it back into the system, and it might generate more results for us. So, another thing you could do with this is you don't have to take this back verbatim, right? You could say like, okay, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take each of these individual lines and sort of generate my own poem from this, right? So, you could just say, let me do this, paste this in, and then come back down here and grab this line. So again, you can sort of chop up your own response and sort of create a little bit of a collage poem from these things. So in general, I think one of the challenges here is I think we've seen like playing with these values um, can change what gets sent back. One thing I should note, and I think Ben, this is also what you're saying, is like in general, these models do return a fixed value of a response. The nice thing about that Colab notebook is that you can change how many characters it responds with. So there is a benefit to using this notebook, but I'm not sure the time it takes to get it up and running makes it worthwhile compared to just trying to use the sort of reprompting system that's available through this. So in fact, yeah, now I can't even get this notebook to load. I think my computer is not doing well with, oh, there we go. So see, there is a generative length. So I believe this is either words or characters. So this is limited to 512. So if in this notebook, if you wanted a longer phrase, I believe you could extend that length. So you might want to just play with both of these and see if one generates a better result because of being able to play with length, or if another one you're able to get different prompts through. And I keep going to that tab. That's not the right tab. Through something like this. I would also highly recommend going through that Gwern piece, which is where I got this from, and for some reason it doesn't work in this particular context. But you may find that there's other structures that are really helpful in order to sort of figure out how to write prompts with these things. So let's see. So this is kind of interesting, is that you can also sort of take a phrase and then ask it to rewrite it. So, take a phrase that is, this and rewrite to be polite from. So maybe you could also say, maybe one thing you want to do is if you take a poem or some other piece of text from, I don't know, a certain style, take this business letter and rewrite in the style of Walt Whitman. See what it would do with that. So much of this is really about finding the key to unlock the structure that you want from GPT, and that, to me, I find that really frustrating. But I know other people that sort of love playing with it. So what I would recommend is maybe for the next couple hours. Yeah, so it is NaNoGenMo time right now, so you can also try to use that to generate your own novel. I would say spend the next spend a couple hours this week just generating different prompts and see if you get anything interesting back. What we're going to do next week is we're going to take a text prompt and turn it into a video using one of the clip notebooks. So we'll look at, I think we're going to look at Aphantasia. I haven't decided exactly what notebook we'll use, but there are a number of notebooks that can take a bunch of different strings of text and will help generate a video from that. So we'll look at that next week. I don't know if that'll take up our full time, so I might have a backup plan for something else depending on how long it takes. One thing to note is that because we're generating a video using a GAN or using clips and GANs, the render time can be fairly long. So I would say, maybe come up with 4 phrases that you want to sort of render at a time. And we'll probably do a low res version in class just to make sure it renders fairly quickly. But then I can show you how to do a longer version as well. So that's kind of the idea between now and next week, is just, come with some cool phrases. Maybe get inspired by some of the videos we watched around what phrases you found interesting. Maybe you just want to work with words, almost like the Barbara Sykes thing where everything is broken down into individual words. Maybe you want to play with something more like the structure of Starfish Aorta Colossus, or other things. So yeah, the goal here is next week is just let's try to generate a cool video from text and see what happens. Next week we'll also talk a little about the prompt engineering that you should do with Clip, which has its own language of how to generate cool images or render things in really high resolution or make them look a certain style. So we'll play with that next week as well. But yeah, the goal here is just to play around a little bit with generating text. I would definitely recommend reading this Gwern article. And if you do have access to GPT-3, or if Steve is willing to plug in some of your text for you, maybe you could try to see how different GPT-J is versus GPT-3. And also maybe, I actually haven't applied for GPT-3 access, but maybe you can apply this week and get access to it before next week. If anyone's particularly interested in that as a trial to see what happens there. Any questions before we wrap up? Cool. Well, I would definitely recommend that if you do make some cool poetry, or if you find a particular prompt structure that works really well, please drop a note in our Slack channel, and that way hopefully other people can sort of learn from that as well. All right, cool. So as I mentioned, I did post all the other videos for the last section of class. And because some of them are very long, I do recommend maybe getting a head start. Maybe not this week, but pretty soon, because we will have about 3 weeks between now and the next time we need to talk about them. So, take a look at those, get started. And if anyone has any questions about them, I'm happy to answer that as well. So I will see everyone. So Sunday we'll do another co-working session. Tuesday we'll do another co-working session, and then we'll have class Thursday. So if anyone does want to talk about more about this or other things that we have covered in class, we can start doing that. And one last thing is to know that we are getting closer to the end of class. So start to think about what you're interested in maybe doing as a little project, whether it's something we've already covered. If anyone's interested, I can tell you what I was planning to cover for the last two classes before the show and tell. But I think we're almost there about covering most of the material. So yeah, happy to talk more about that, or if people have ideas that they need help with, I can help with that. All right. So with that, we'll wrap up, and I'll see everyone in either in co-working sessions or next week. All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thanks.
Thanks, Derek. It's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.